Hi, everybody. So Attorney Di and I are going to get together and talk next week, and I'm kind of excited about this because she and I have a very different approach to reading case law, and it's as somebody whose job it is to read case law, I'm going to look at what I consider my weaknesses are, that I will get sort of caught on a couple of really big points and will go into crazy amount of detail trying to learn things about those points, but sometimes I can miss the forest for the trees. And so I'm always concerned that as I go through and try to form conclusions based on what I've gathered, that I'm going to have missed some tiny little detail in there, and that it's going to kind of invalidate these things that I'm focusing on. So she instead really more focuses on, well, not instead, but her I think her superpower is really catching every single detail. She's so good at it. And so I'm really excited we were talking about this, to kind of sit with her and go through a case together and sort of see how we see it. And I think between the two of us, we're going to have kind of an interesting take and an interesting way of looking at it. And there are questions that I have. We've had a few really big, important cases come out over the last couple of months. And we're going to start with kind of a smaller one. I think we're going to start with the Wall Street Journal case and go through that. But eventually we talked about, possibly doing the CASA case, because there's just so much to talk about there. And I've been talking to her about the fact that, I'm so in, because I was like, I feel like either I missed something or they didn't keep everything in, they didn't hit everything, but I'm really worried that I missed something. She goes, you didn't miss anything. They just skipped over a lot of stuff. I was like, that makes me feel better. Anyway, we're going to sit here and do this. Yes. Yeah. This is Attorney Di I'm talking about. We were supposed to do a live today, and then she was going out of town tomorrow. She had to leave town a day early, so we're going to push that back probably to next week. But I'm really excited about it. We talked on the phone for a while on Saturday, and I'm really, really excited. Yeah, we're going to sit, because we just have different ways of going through this stuff. I'm not complaining about her. I love her. And so I'm hoping that, between the two of us, we'll come up with some really interesting and new ways of looking at some of these cases and bring out some interesting stuff. So that's what we're going to try to do sometime in the next week. I can block you if you want, but I can't tell if what your point is here. Yeah, I did. I got a haircut. I had I told the story the other day. I had a situation where my I had two cars. So not the bug. The bug is fine, but the bus actually burned. It caught fire and is gone. And I lost my glasses in the process, because I left my glasses in there, and so they're gone. So I went and I had to go get new glasses. And while I was getting new glasses, my roommate was like, "Hey, you want me to trim your hair a little bit while you getting coming out?" And I was like, "Sure." And he started to trim a little bit, and next thing I knew, this was my haircut. So, but I think I like it. It took me a little bit. At first I was like, but now I like it. I like it. I've got new glasses. I've got new haircut. It's totally new. Hey, Larry, how's it going? So yeah. But I also, after talking, thank you, Larry. After talking to Di for a bit, she was like, you really need to go live more. I was like, okay. I get so stuck in. It was not a van again, Jason, but it was a bus. It was a Volkswagen camper van from the 70s, and yeah, we pulled into a parking spot in a parking garage, and all of a sudden this big cloud of smoke kind of pulled up next to us, and it was like, where's that coming from? And we look back, and there's just fire coming out. Hey, Hadamias, how's it going? and tried to put it out. Went through about, I think we went through about 11 or 12 fire extinguishers trying to put it out, and eventually the fire department showed up and just told us to run. I don't know what caused it. We won't know because there is just nothing left. It turns out that the engine the engine block is made of a combination of metals, including magnesium, which means that once it hits a certain temperature, it turns into a giant firework. And so, not a great design choice. Yeah. Are we having a lab today? So yeah, I think so. I think I'm gonna talk. So I wanted I was saying I'm trying to start doing these a little bit more often, and one of the things that stops me from doing that is that my regular videos take so much preparation, and I also try to do the same thing for a live, but with not knowing what people are going to ask, I end up just preparing so much. And so it tends to stop me from going live. So I'm a little bit less prepared today, intentionally. I have something to talk about, but, and I think this might be sort of a route for me to start using as kind of to get me started on lives, which is just to look at kind of the most recent case law that's coming out from these federal cases, and just at least have that to start talking about. I know I should be teaching law somewhere. And yeah, CC, it's kind of funny that it is a lot more. I did not knowingly drive a flammable van, and I right before we left, I even checked everything to make sure it wasn't going to do it. But only so much you can do. I'm always concerned that I'm going to freeze up under public pressure. And by the way, sitting here and just talking for an hour to 90 minutes is a lot, but I kind of like it. You bring a subject that can be quite dry to life. Thank you. It's dry, it's boring, and particularly I try not to. It's so tempting. Ford Pinto. It's tempting and hard not to sensationalize, and it's a tough road to walk, because I want people to watch, I want people to stick around, but also don't want to say something that isn't true or is even kind of misleading. So I'm not a law student. Oh, well, thank you, Larry. So trying to find that line of keeping it interesting without, I can't think of a better way of saying CNNifying, forcing it to be interesting, can be tough. I always feel particularly when when you have to put that thing up at the top, because people leave in the first 2 or 3 seconds, and whatever you write there is either going to grab them or not. And so trying to find out something that tells you what's in there, I don't want to mislead people, but also is interesting enough to grab the eye, it's a tightrope. So I have a video that I made, and I'm going to release a little bit later, that's about a filing that came out today. Actually, I'm sorry, it didn't come out today. It came out on Friday, but I saw it today. And it's not an exceptionally interesting filing, but it's got some really interesting stuff going on. Average length of view for my videos, the average length is usually 1 to 2 seconds. Most people turn off from 1 to 2 seconds. So getting people to stick around, it's some people, and usually I get 5, depending on the video, 5 to 10 people that watch the whole, 5 to 10% that watch the whole video. Which, particularly if it's like an 11-minute video, a 12-minute video, is really hard to get people to stick around for the whole thing. So it is quite a spread, but almost. There's this little thing in the information that tells you, most people turned off in X number of seconds. And the number of videos I put up that have broken the 3-second barrier, that have made it to 3 seconds, probably 4 or 5. I've never made it past 3 seconds. So most people are not interested in this. Or I'm just not good. It's hard to get that right at the beginning, get people in the door. I'm so excited. My roommate, this was a gift. My roommate bought me some of these, so I'm enjoying them. So let's see here. Oh, all right. So this filing came out today, and I don't know if anybody remembers. A couple of weeks ago, there was this decision that came out of the Supreme Court, where who was it? It was Sotomayor on one side and Jackson on the other, and they're talking about. Sotomayor joined the majority. It was an 8-1 decision, and it was procedural. But basically, the idea was this: it was a decision essentially on an executive order, and generally, the question, is this a constitutional executive order, was part of the question being asked, and 8 of the 9 justices say it doesn't matter, or whatever. Most of them didn't say why they decided this, but Sotomayor said that the substance of what it was telling people to do may not have been constitutional, but the executive order itself didn't actually tell anybody to do anything. It was just kind of suggestions, and everything it said that may have pushed the line had a little thing at the end that said, don't break the law when you do this. Jackson, on the other hand, wrote a contrary, a dissenting opinion that said that just evaluated the arguments and said these arguments are facially unconstitutional. And I think the 2 of them put them out to be sort of, I think of them as the bumpers. When kids go bowling and they run the bumpers down the gutters, so the ball kind of just bounces. That's sort of what I was thinking. It was like a bumper on each side to keep it in the lane. And one opinion was saying, watch it, but we're not going to overturn it. But here's, stay on this side. And the other was saying, but if you go too far, this is what's coming. So they kind of let them know, where things were. Good, good cop, bad cop, carrot and stick, whatever you want to say. I thought that was interesting. And of course, the way it came out in the court or in the newspaper was that the court had allowed whatever. It really was a very different newspaper story than I think what was actually in the case. What I noticed in this filing the other day, and this was one of those things where, one side had filed something and the other side had filed a response and then filed a response and filed a response, it bounced back and forth several times. So this was like the reply to the response to the reply or something or other. And their first thing had been filed before that decision, but they were kind of honing their arguments, I think, in light of that decision. And what they said was, I'm sorry, this was a government filing, and a good chunk of what they said, of course they defended their arguments like they always do, but what they put at the back of everything was, but no matter what, we said don't break the law everywhere. So we caveated everything. So nothing here is actually in order. So even if this is unconstitutional, it doesn't matter because this executive order doesn't direct anybody to do anything. And that was pretty in line with what this other case had said. And I don't know whether it's going to pass muster or not. We'll see. But it was interesting. And there's 2 sides to it. On the one side, it's okay. do we want, the only way to restrict that would be to say that essentially the president doesn't have a free speech right, because if he actually hasn't broken the law, then okay, then what are we doing? But on the other side, are we setting up the ability for him to essentially repeatedly build up these unconstitutional orders over and over and over again, and just wait, knowing that they're unconstitutional, and just kind of let them sit there because technically none of them are real orders. And it sort of gives the ability of the president to put anything he wants in an executive order, like absolutely anything, as long as he says at the end, oh, but I don't really mean it. Knowing fully well that in the meantime, we're actually going to try to get through, because some of these other executive orders say things like the Attorney General needs to do what she can to try to change judicial precedent on this matter. So try to move the goalposts and get things that are maybe not constitutional today into the constitutional realm. So we build up all of these things that we know are unconstitutional and just wait for the goalposts to move. And do we want to encourage that either? So anyway, I thought this was a really interesting thing, and I put together a video. I'm going to post it in a little bit. I was just finishing up the editing, and I thought, I'm going to jump in here first and get the live done, because I keep saying I'm going to do it. But I thought it was really cool, or I mean, I don't know, cool or not, but at least interesting to see. When you see a new trend start to emerge in filings, and you can, particularly if you can take it back to another spot where you saw the suggestion get made, it's an interesting thing to watch. So that was just something that I saw today, and again, I'm gonna put a video up about that in a little while. But it's oh, and it's also a voting rights case, which is particularly interesting and something that I want to get into more. I've been doing my research on the law of democracy, and I want to help try to get. Thank you, Larry. I try. It's not always, I try to sit there and say, there have been a couple. Well, sometimes I just don't succeed, but sometimes I put it in, and then I've cut a couple. I've started to record things, and I'm like, I can't. This one's just too much opinion. Yeah, it's a struggle. I'll tell you what I've tried to set the line is that I don't mind giving bias or opinion as long as it's bias or opinion inside my wheelhouse. So if it's about how we interpret law very specifically, or that sort of thing, then I feel a little better about it. But I feel like there are a bunch of people who do that. There's plenty of that out on the internet, and I'm trying to bring something different. But I do happen to be, an expert in legal interpretation. So if that sort of thing comes up, maybe I'll talk about it. Whether I believe President Trump is doing that is unconstitutional, I don't know. I don't know. We don't know yet. I would say the best guess I can say is, yeah, more of that, yeah. Or I'll say, yeah, okay, this is the end of the analysis section. My best guess as to whether or not it was constitutional is that it seems like at least that portion of the argument seems to track pretty closely on that other decision that was made. But I don't know. I have to see. I'm not a judge, so I can only make guesses, but I can at least draw the pieces out for you guys so you can track what's going on and be informed. And when these things come out, you know what to look for. 14th Amendment. But constitutional Overton window is a good. So that's, and this is sort of the big question is, for a very long time, there hasn't been much of a push to shift the Constitution. We've done it, we've done like a couple of big bursts of change. And, for example, right after I got to watch, you don't want to flag the thing, but right after there's a good way of saying this. Anyway, the thing that happened in like 1864, right after that, we have 3 amendments, which were it was one of the biggest sudden shifts in the Constitution since the Constitution was written. So that was big shifts. Otherwise, we tend to do them in little fits and starts. There were a couple other time periods where we've done sort of a few things at once that were really substantial. Early 1920 or early teens kind of area. And there are people who think that now is the time for another one of those. And I don't have an answer to that. Maybe they're right. And one way to kind of force that to happen is to have, to force that to happen one way or the other is to have the president really pushing the boundaries of the Constitution, because either it's going to convince people that we need to shift the Constitution in the direction that is being suggested, or it's going to convince people that we need to put up more safeguards. So it could have either effect. And we'll see. Oh, yeah, if you guys can click, that would be helpful. Just to tap and get it up. I'm going to try to get it. Oh, by the way, somebody just said, I missed it. Somebody said something nice, and I appreciate it. The Constitution is imperfect, but it's serviceable. Absolutely. And I really enjoy studying the framework of the Constitution and the kind of, there's a great book. And one of you actually bought it for me, so thank you. It's an amazing book. It is a tough read. It is such a tough read that I am still not through it yet. It's called The Invisible Constitution. It's by Lawrence Tribe, he's brilliant. He's a little hard to follow, but he's brilliant. And it talks about, so it separates out, you have the written Constitution, and then he also separates out kind of the unwritten part of the Constitution that's like case law. He's like, I'm not talking about that. There's that whole conversation. But then he brings up this third thing, this sort of structural Constitution, this architectural Constitution. And it's something that really kind of changed my thinking on how the Constitution works, and very much changed my thinking on how I've been teaching it, which is that there are a lot of conclusions that if you read the Constitution and think about it in enough ways, there are things that are implied in the Constitution and that have to be implied. Like, logically, there's no way around implying certain things, and I can't think of an example, of course, right now when I need one. Federalism. So whether or not federalism was added as an amendment, I would say, in the 10th Amendment, but it's sort of implied in the structure of the Articles. The division of power between the federal government and the rest of the government. The author is Lawrence Tribe. It's The Invisible Constitution. And so federalism, even though today, even though we eventually got the 10th Amendment and whatever, it's implied in the Articles because the power of the branches is restricted to what's listed in the articles. So if the power is restricted to what's listed there, then automatically it implies that anything not listed there does not belong to this government, and it belongs to something else. And that is kind of the root of the concept of federalism, this giant wall that's built between the federal government and everybody else, and the powers that are retained by the states and by the people and whatever that aren't given to the federal government. And so this idea of federalism, it's structural, it's built in, but it's not, it doesn't have to be said anywhere. And so he goes through these kind of different ideas that are built into the structure, but man, does he do it in he's never going to see this, obviously, but I'm still, okay, I'm sorry, guys, but this has just got to end. Diarrhea just had to go. I tried. Anyway, I found it really interesting and fascinating. Okay, sorry, I got sidetracked there. Yeah, I know, guys. Early on, I told that person to be nice or I was going to kick them out, and they did actually get a whisper nicer, and so I was waiting. But yeah, I don't love blocking people, so I wait for absolute whatever. A good faith clause of the Constitution. The problem with a good faith clause in the Constitution. Okay, let me come back to that, Harambe, because and I'm going to forget to come back to it. But I started to say something, and now I'm rethinking it because it might be sort of structural, but less absolute. But I do think that good faith has been implied in the past. And so it's interesting that it doesn't seem to be implied right now, but it might be political in nature. It might be one of those things where if people don't show good faith, we're supposed to vote them out. And then the question that Mr. Pickles asked, the new bill that was passed on the homeless, did you, I don't know, thank you, Harambe. I don't know if you saw my video on that, Mr. Pickles. I'm concerned about it, and I recommend, by the way, reading it in its entirety because I had to cut down my video on it. It was way too long because I went into way too much detail. There's a lot in there, and there are a lot of policies in there that are I don't like. And again, as we talked about, as Larry mentioned a little bit ago, I try to keep biases out of these, but less so when it's something that I have a lot of experience in. And in this case, I have a ton of experience in this particular, very narrow area of the law, because I was the only person in my jurisdiction managing civil commitments. And so I did a lot of civil commitment hearings on my own, every step of them, and kind of made every decision related to civil commitments. It was all me. And so I have a lot of experience in civil commitments, and I understand when they are absolutely necessary, they're necessary. And I was trying to think the other day, because someone had asked me about it in a live, and I worry, I have to be really careful because some of the information in there is privileged. And so I have to be very careful what I say. We would impose a civil commitment on someone who was in danger of hurting themselves. And somebody had responded something about people having a right to kind of do whatever they wanted to themselves, whatever, permanently. And okay, that conversation aside, because again, policy conversation, and policy conversation outside of my wheelhouse. What I was dealing with were people. My mic stopped working? Is my mic working? What I was dealing with were people in temporary situations that would resolve. It wasn't they weren't on a bridge. They were hitting themselves in the head with something hard. And later on, I would speak to them, and on a couple of occasions, not every occasion, they were very thankful, because what had happened, was something like they ran out of their medication and forgot to go to the pharmacy or something like that, and then all of a sudden it had been a couple of days, and the wall started breathing, and next thing you know. So there are times when a civil commitment is an important and a useful thing, but they have to be used really sparingly. And the steps that we had to go through, that I had to go through, the hoops I had to jump through, the hurdles I had to jump over, whatever, to impose one of these was really, really high. And that is how it is supposed to be. This EO it aims to lower that standard. And I don't like that idea, because I think it is supposed to be high, even when, I knew we needed it, and I was very frustrated at the amount of work I had to do to get it. I still understood why we made it so difficult. And particularly using it as a method of housing people seems like a short-sighted decision, because it is not a great thing. Yeah, it's very hard to get out once in. And so to use this is, according to my read of this EO, this is meant to become the new number one step for a lot of homeless people. And that does not seem like a good idea. I'm watching myself real carefully, making sure, Larry, watching my policy, making sure I'm staying in my wheelhouse. But doesn't seem like a good idea. That was I hope that wasn't too long of an answer to a short question. But there's also a lot of other things in there. I have a big thing about the crime related to actually being homeless does not sit well with me, because we have a history. We have in the past, and by we, I'm going to say, I mean the common law prior to the U.S. I don't know if the U.S. ever did this, but there was a time under the origins of this legal system that people could be locked up for not paying a debt. In other words, you could lose your freedom for not having money. And that has been determined to be bad. That is overturned. That is something we cannot do anymore. The debtor's prisons, exactly. And this feels parallel in theory to that idea. It also feels parallel to the idea of imprisoning people based on their status or situation rather than an action, which also bothers me. I don't like the idea of taking away someone's freedom because of something they have no control over. So now, whether or not cash bond is the same thing, you stepped into something interesting, but that's a more complicated conversation. It has been justified through some twisty, turny legal wrestling matches, and I can't think of it off the top of my head what the argument is. There is an argument. So it's probably even a relatively sensible argument. I just can't think of what it is. I don't mean to make it glib or whatever. But that's, but it is, there is an argument. There has been an argument that cash bond is a similar idea, and that is not an argument. That is not something that has been discussed many times. Whether or not that's correct, I will not wander into, because that's a whole day of discussion. And I'm not prepared. I don't have the information on my head, but it is something that people, it's got valid discussions. So don't think that you're hitting on a good point. It's just, this, on the other hand, just having essentially run out of money is a on its own a different question. And I am. When I was going through law school, there was this kind of new thing. It wasn't new, but it was gaining steam. This whole idea of starting to reevaluate law based on status, there's a great term for it, but things that you can't change about yourself, things that you don't have control over, and really shifting the constitutional evaluation of things based on whether or not you were really able to control what happened a little more broadly. And so it's the phrase I'm trying to think of is immutable characteristics. There we go. Characteristics that are, thank you, Harambe, that cannot be muted about yourself. But also a little bit more broadly, things that you don't have as much control over. And so things that kind of just strike me as inherently status oriented, like who you are rather than what you've done. So I don't know why this makes sense to me, but not having access to a place to live feels like a status. Not having money feels like a status rather than something that you did. And so imposing some sort of punishment based on that feels like it's all part of that same line that we have been drawing for several hundred years, and we kind of have to stick to it. So when the Supreme Court made a decision, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, something, that allowed that town in Oregon maybe to criminalize what was, in my mind, depending on how you framed it, being outside without having a place to live. It was a status, just existing without having a place to live was a crime. That felt problematic to me. So now it was more specific because it was about sleeping outside or something, but just kind of depended how you turn it around. Thank you very much, Wolf of the Air. I appreciate it. Yeah, and exactly, that's the idea behind bond is has a different intent. So thank you, RX Ponder. I appreciate it. Oh, by the way, guys, so there's something. This is another thing that Attorney Dye recommended me that I do, and I thought, I can't imagine anybody's gonna watch this, but so far some people have. So I am gonna download my lives and put them on YouTube. I'm not supposed to say that, the Y word, or I'll get. But I'm gonna be putting them. So I'm putting them over there. I don't expect a ton of people to watch them, but they're going to be over there. I could only get a couple of them because they only save them for like 30 days. Yeah, Kevin, I was telling this earlier, but yeah, it's a long story. But yes, I hacked it all off. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to put them over there because one of the things I was worried about is the framing. And Attorney Dye said, nobody cares. My favorite. I love the mustache. Okay. Attorney Dye said nobody cares. She said just put it up there. Nobody's going to care. They're just going to want to listen anyway. It doesn't matter if it's framed this way or this way. I said, all right. So I'm just putting them up. So that's going to be another thing. And I went off. A police activity at the Orlando Federal. I did not hear about activity at the police at the federal courthouse. So I hope everybody's okay. I don't know what's. Oh, thank you. Yeah, just gotta keep me going. And yeah, if anybody wants to, if you go to my profile, there's places in my L tree, which again, someone told me I've got to avoid certain words in the live or it'll flag. But that there are ways, thank you, to keep me going, because I'm running on, this is what I'm doing. I do have, by the way, so I've been working on this idea that, I got this idea that, like, there's so much research that I have to do to get this stuff together, and I thought if I could find a way to kind of at least pull certain pieces of information together into like a report for myself to kind of start the day and find things like, what are the new cases, where are they from, who was the judge, where something that I could have a place to start, cut some of the morning whatever out. And so I've been working on learning how to use make things, whatever, automations, so that I can try to set up some reports for myself that I can then use maybe in lives, and just come in here and be like, hey, this is what's happening in the law today, and here's what I found. It will cut out that hour and a half of scanning. Yeah, there are some programs that but you still have to learn how to use them, and of course they don't do what they're always supposed to do. A bookcase tour. Oh boy, so many. What's new? I have a couple new ones. Oh wait, sitting over there. A couple new. Oh, actually, well, I have the. So somebody sent. So I've got a couple new things. One is I've been doing the. Thank you. I love the. So this painting was in a friend of mine. It's a house of a friend of mine, and I think it was her mother's. And she was just kind of clearing some stuff out, and it was just like one of my favorite things. I love this. It's this woman sitting by a fire. I named her Esmeralda. I don't know. That's just what I call her. And it reminds me of, if anybody sees What We Do in the Shadows, it just always makes me think of, name is escaping me, but the character from What We Do in the Shadows, sitting by the fire. But I love this painting. And so technically it is still her. She was just going to get rid of it or sell it or something. And she said I can keep it forever, but I'm assuming that if she ever wants it back. This, though, so somebody sent me, so there's a couple of things somebody sent me. First is, if you've been watching, somebody sent me a copy of Robert's Rules of Order. So I've been using that to start making some short videos, and I'm learning a lot, because it's there's a lot of things that if you've watched enough congressional stuff, you sort of know what they're going to do and you know how they work, but to actually see it as a rule changes the way you see it a little bit, I think. And so I'm going to start making those. Nadia, thank you. So I have that, and somebody also sent me the Senate rules, so I'm looking at those as well, although I'm a little bit, because of the fact that the Senate seems very much stuck a lot of the time in their budget stuff, because it's the only thing that can be 50%. I'm looking through this, I'm like, I don't bet that they do a lot of this stuff anymore, because they're not getting to 2/3 majority. So the House and Senate they have their own rule books, and what I learned is that Robert's Rules of Order was actually written way after the House and Senate had written their rules. It was written in the late 1800s because all of these... so Jefferson had written, when he was president of the Senate, wrote a rule book because he was like, this is a disaster. And he based it on the English Parliament. And both the House and Senate used that as a starting point anyway. But they changed over the years. But also, every other legislature, city, state, everywhere, also kind of used those as jumping off points. And they also wrote some shorter versions that people used. But over the years, different regions started shifting the rules a little bit. And so, in this area, like, we start doing this stuff, whatever. So these different rules kind of emerge in these different regions over, decades. And it wasn't until this guy, he was major at the time, but Brigadier General Robert got sent to San Francisco and as part of the Army Corps of Engineers, and a bunch of other people were sent from all over the country, and they're all sent together, and they have to have meetings, and they all have their own set of the kind of what they think are the standard meeting rules, but they're totally different because they've just evolved over years and years. And he was like, it just was a disaster, nothing could get done. And so he said, okay, we got to wipe the slate clean and write a whole new set of rules. And so he went back to what had evolved at that point for the House of Representatives, because he liked theirs best. He looked around, U.S. House had the best set of rules, he thought. So he used the U.S. House of Representatives in, the late 1800s, or mid, 1870s, late 1870s, I think, and wrote a new set of rules to be kind of a standard. And I can't imagine he thought people were going to read them. I'm guessing it'd be like, if I wrote a book, I would probably think, okay, who's going to actually read this? But I'm going to write it because it's going to be fun. And it turned out it sold out immediately. It had to be reprinted a bunch of times. People just went crazy over it. And so it became kind of this new standard. And it's supposed to be like a cookie cutter that you adapt to your own rules and your own version. Yeah, you take it and make it in your... But the book does a really good job of explaining kind of the, okay, what's emotion? As opposed to anything else that happens in here, let's talk about what emotion is and what the different categories of emotions are. And those aren't going to change so much. And so you kind of get these, bird's eye view of what these meeting rules are. And so anyway, it's been very interesting. And some of what you see and the way that people interact with each other in some of these rules, like just little things, like the rule, had this rule that said no one is allowed to address an assembly while seated. And I thought, well, that's weird, because you always see these committee hearings where everybody's sitting down, and they're asking questions, and they're all sitting. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. Maybe they just don't follow that anymore. And then a page later, they said, okay, caveats are that if you are in a committee meeting, that is where people can sit. But if you're in the Grand Assembly, you have to get up and walk up to the front and address the whole room, because that's how they keep a record, is by having one person talk at a time. And so it just, and now it's all I'm going to see whenever I see a committee meeting, or whenever you see the whole Congress, you always see one person in the front speaking only to the chair, or whoever's the highest person. Yeah, so it's just been cool. So anyway, that's that. This was supposed to be a book tour. I got that book. The one I told you about earlier, this Tribe book, got me interested in this writer named Akil Reed Amar, who's a Yale professor. And particularly, there's one particular book, it's called U.S. Constitution, a Biography, that's been really interesting, and it's covered in notes now. But someone also just sent me this, which is another book by him. I just have the cover because the rest of the book's sitting over there. But it's called The Words That Made Us. It's also by him, and it's sort of, they call it America's Constitutional Conversation. It's sort of as the Constitution is written, it's sort of first-hand accounts of what was happening. So, pretty cool. Rules of precedence, rules of precedence, rules of precedence of which kind of motion can be raised at what point. And I think, there's going to be specific subtle differences between the House version, this version, that version, but it's, the broad strokes, I think, are going to be good to know, good to understand. Let's demand fair redistricting interstate compact. I will stand by my redistricting. I think that the redistricting rule should be that we set a maximum number of angles. And if you want to increase, for every increase in angle, if you want, you are allowed to make a shape that has, 8 sides, or 8 angles to it, but that's it. And if you want to get a 9th angle, you have to meet with a bipartisan committee and justify that ninth angle. And so it becomes about just chopping up the state and not about trying to get, and it's really only about getting all the, okay, fine, we have to get it separated by the right number of numbers, cool, fine. There is no reason for there to be more than, a certain, and I don't know what that number is. Make up a different number, fine, but pick a number. There do not need to be 50 angles. I don't like the idea of a constitutional convention for several reasons. I think that we need to we're easily overwhelmed. If we want to make a decision, cool, but let's focus on it. And not focus on 5 decisions that allow people to slip things in without properly explaining them. We have seen that is a tactic that is used, flooding whatever, there's a phrase, flooding, they like to flood us with information so that we're overwhelmed, and I don't think that is a good idea. And so, sorry, a couple people. So one thing I will say, who was it? Kiko, is that there's a word. The phrase is there's a better word than both sidism, but there's like a much more formal way of saying that. But both sidism, I'm not trying to say both sidism here because it is frankly not even. But there's definitely some redistrict shenanigans that goes on in blue states as well. I don't think it's as extreme historically, but I don't think that you can absolve anybody. And so I think that across the board, it's just better to say, I'd love to say just make squares. But I understand that sometimes we can't just make squares because of the shape, but I don't think we need to go way beyond that. And this has been something I came up with. I came up with that idea in the 90s, and nobody has. I've been every once in a while I get the chance to say that to somebody because I've been thinking about that since the 90s, but. Who am I going to say it to? Any legal remedy for whack-a-mole similar EOs? I think let's take legal remedy out of it. I think the practical remedy is doing your best to stay on top of what's going on, which is difficult to do. I am not on top of what's going on. I have not read every EO because there are so many of them. And this is pretty, this is what I do. So, but the more information, the more we inform ourselves, the less easy it is to try to slip things past, and that is, misdirection is a problem. So, try to stay on top. Thank you. I think that's a really good idea, right? Have you ever contacted your legislature about the maximum number of angles idea? Probably not. I doubt it. Well, unfortunately, my legislator does not have a vote in Congress because of where I live. Actually, the last 2 places I've lived, we haven't had a vote in Congress, which I seem to pick federal territories. Apparently have a thing for federal territories, but it's part of actually why some people have asked me like why I haven't ever considered running for office, especially if I'm encouraging other people to do it, which I am. I think anybody people ask, what can I do? I said, run for office. But, it's, well, why don't you? And it's because of where I live. We don't have a vote in Congress here, and as a result, our member of Congress is a little more symbolic, I think, and as a result, we've had the same person there for decades. So, yeah. Do you know if any partisan redistricting has been struck down because of disparate impact? Yes, it has. Disparate impact on politics or disparate impact on other things, because there's a legal disparate impact, related to the Voting Rights Act, but not necessarily related to politics, and that's going to be the big Louisiana case that's going to come up for. Yeah, race is the issue, is the question. Hold on, every time. Okay, all right. I get warnings whenever AP releases a news break, and it's always like, oh, what is it? What's happening now? Yeah, I think Polygon is a really good. I don't mind stretch. If it needs to be a square that's shaped this way, or a rectangle that's shaped this way, or whatever, okay, because there's a river, or because the edge of the state goes in a weird direction, okay, cool. But there is still no reason to, build, a dinosaur, or some kind of, Rorschach test. Boop, 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 follow the river, or whatever it is, whatever you need to do, and close it in the least number of moves possible. Practical. We'll put practical restriction on it in case, like I said, there's some states are very oddly shaped. Maryland is right next door. They've got that weird little, I've been good, Pesh. It's good to see you. Let's see. Would the Supreme Court strike down New York and California gerrymanders done in response to Texas, but then preserve Texas? I don't know. It would. I don't know. I would have to know. It would have to come up as an argument. You know what I mean? Somebody would have to say, oh, they're different because Texas did this and California did this, and that's why this is and this is not legal or constitutional or whatever. And without hearing an argument, I can't evaluate it, and I can't think of what the argument would be off the top of my head. But so that's the problem. Is I'm thinking, like, all of a sudden, my gears are turning. I'm like, oh, could they say maybe that, because California only did it in response to Texas doing it, and Texas did it because of this, maybe something, whatever. I don't know. But nothing comes to mind. But I don't want to even hazard a guess without, really putting some thought into what the arguments might be. And I don't know what they would be off the top of my head. Just physical boundaries, one single side, I think would be a great way of doing that. Oh, here we go. All right, I hear you. Hold on, I'm about to get a weird buzzing sound. Come here. Dude. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. Oh, don't be Really? Okay. There we go. Sorry. Computational geometry. Yeah, that's good too. That's better. That's certainly probably. But I think that we need to. I think that a rule that applies across the board and reduces the potential for abuse, rather than something that accepts. Right now a lot of states will have some sort of a bipartisan committee that approves things, and that's usually more accepting that the abuse is going to happen and trying to find ways to mitigate it. I think it's better if, wherever possible, to, oh, thank you, I love the paper crane, to try to reduce the potential for abuse beforehand, if it can be done. And like I said, I'm creating a possibility for abuse because they can add things by going to that committee, but I think that you put a big hurdle in the way first. But oh yeah, so there is the Voting Rights Act and some there's a lot of case law related to this. It's right here in this book, The Law of Democracy. Does a fair amount of there are some rules about redistricting particularly based on race in states that have a historical issue with race. That is part of the calculus. Certain states were, and I don't know if they still are, I think this may have been changed recently, were required to pass all changes through somebody, maybe the FEC or something, for approval to make sure that they weren't doing anything funny. I'm not sure whether that still stands or not. I would need to look. But that was at one point the rule. Hold on, let's see here. Sorry, somebody's blocking my view here. Rocket science. I think that's a cool idea. I appreciate it. Somebody keeps calling me or asking me to join them as a co-host, which I appreciate, but I'm busy. I'm talking to people. SCOTUS stopped that about 7 or 8 years ago. Okay, I think Wolf, I think you're right. I was trying to. I was like, I feel like this is not in place anymore. But what do we have? Oh, okay. So, sorry. Again, I got an AP News thing, and I was checking to make sure, but I don't think there's. It's nothing as exciting as I hoped. Did I like Ozzy? I mean, I grew up with, that. I'm trying to think. I think by the time I was, picking music, Ozzy was already older. So it was not much older, but older enough that it wasn't like kids' music. And I don't mean it was more like classic. So it was something that you knew and you recognized, but it was always kind of a classic for me. What's really funny is that I had, oh, thank you, Harambe, I appreciate it. I had a good friend in high school who his family, except his dad, the rest of his family reminded me so much of that family of the Osbournes. Like every single one of them, to a T, reminded me so much of them. And it was really funny. Okay, Larry, thank you for coming by. Thank you. It just reminded me so much of them, and it's something that I've never been able to get out of my head. That's kind of. So you're 68. I'm 79, and so I'm just at the end. I was like maybe 12 or 13 when we started to hit grunge. So just as that was kind of. Black Sabbath was a little bit further behind, but it wasn't quite my parents' music, but it was like my babysitter's music. But it's definitely very sad to see him go. Yep. No, I turned 46. I am creaky and old. Yeah, it catches up with you. I'm the last year of Gen X, and I think it's funny when I was, in school, I remember my mom saying that she was like, the kids the year behind you are there's something a little different. I can't quite explain it, but something has changed. And those are now the millennials, which is kind of funny. But way back then, when we were all kids, she was like, something is different for anybody born like the year after you. So, well, thank you. I look 33. Oh, I'll take it. Oh, go on. Okay, it was Shelby Counter v. Holder removed the federal pre-clearance requirements for new voting policies. Yeah. Latchkey kids, drinking water out of the hose. We had a bell, and you needed to stay close enough to the house to hear the bell, but that was not that close. It was like a bell on the back of the house that went pretty far. And so when I was young, really young, before we got old enough to like ride our bikes miles away, that was the rule, was we had to stay in bell range so that we could hear the bell and come back. But I mean, there were like railroad track. We would like go play in the tracks, and yeah, it was a very different style of parenting. And it's I don't think I would ever make an issue out of drinking water from the hose. I don't think it's that interesting, except for the fact that people of a certain age think it's weird. And it was so common. Like, not even your own hose. Like, anywhere you were. If you were just walking by somebody's house and you were thirsty, you just grab their hose and turn it on. That was like such a thing. So that's the only reason that I think it's interesting, is that I had kind of forgotten about it until it became a conversation. Whistle. Okay, yeah. So both of my parents could do that neighborhood whistle as well. The whistle was what we'd get if we were out somewhere and usually in trouble. That meant, get back here right now, you're in trouble. But we knew that whistle. And I'd have to think, I knew what the whistle was. Like, I knew there was like a particular pattern that was my parents. And I think, yeah, there was probably a point. So the town that I was in kind of had some physical barriers around it, and so we just sort of stayed within those physical barriers. But partially just because we didn't really, all the stuff we wanted to do was, there was like a river on one side, so you couldn't get past that. And the Little Miami River was on one side, and then there was kind of a big road, and there was just nothing that interesting on the other side of it. So we just sort of stayed mostly on one side of it, and that was kind of. But beyond that, there were plenty of room within that. But yeah, it was just a different style of living. I feel very lucky to have grown up when I did. And grew up on a farm. What kind of farm was it? Harambee? Little Miami, Cincinnati. So when I got a little bit older, I used to work. Work is relative. It was like a friend of a friend, but had a horse farm, and on the weekends we would go build fence. Oh, cool! Awesome. Yep. I grew up in on the east side of Cincinnati. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time on farms, the horse farms. Well, a horse farm. It was like a pretty busy road, and every weekend people would getting drunks would knock out parts of the fence, and so we Saturday morning and Sunday morning we'd go put up. We definitely went to Kings Island. We had season passes to Kings Island. Oh, okay, cool. All right, you were in Kenya. That's more interesting than mine. But yeah, this was like. It was a guy who had I think his parents had actually been like active horse farmers, and after when they passed away, he had this horse farm that he lived on, but I don't think he necessarily, like, the number of horses seem to be dwindling over the years. You had a zoo in your high school with monkeys? In Massachusetts. What part of Massachusetts had a monkey? That's pretty cool. Kings Island was awesome. Kings Island was awesome, and then we also spent a lot of time up in northern Ohio. So we did Cedar Point a bit as well. That is, everybody had a zoo. I mean, we had a, there was a zoo in, we had a zoo in downtown, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but there was, one in the middle. And it's kind of funny, you don't think of it as being, I always thought of, I don't think of it this way anymore, but as growing up, I always felt like downtown was like a different place, and that's where all of the big fancy stuff was, like the zoo. Yeah, but no, that is fascinating that you had a zoo. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up because I said an hour and we're an hour and 15. I'm going to try to start doing this a little bit more often, and I'm going to try to capuchin monkeys that failed out of the Helping Hands program. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna try to start doing this a little bit more often, and I'm trying to set up, like I said, this situation so that I have good stuff to talk about. And then I have a video that I'm going to be posting in a little while that's got some more info on what I talked about earlier, which was the new motion and the possibility of kind of shifting the response on how EOs are written, and I think maybe a new, thank you, Pete, maybe a new approach by the administration to writing and defending executive orders that are possibly or actively or whatever facially unconstitutional. So I'm going to have that video out soon, and I will try to be on here more often, and thank you guys for sticking by. All right, have a good one, everybody.